So for the fourth time, third actual time getting a race in, the World Endurance Championship is here in Sebring, Florida. And I thought it would be kind of cool, since I have the opportunity, to give you guys a tour of this paddock. There's so many new cars, new things to see, and frankly, I think we're kind of entering a golden age of sports car racing. So it's good to document these sort of things when you have this many cool things in one place. As you can see, it's rained quite a bit here, so hopefully we'll get through this without it raining too much, and hopefully I won't look too stupid talking to myself, essentially. Interesting thing here, World Endurance Championship does have a bit of a tire war. Goodyear Tires is supplying all of the cars in LMP2. However, they don't supply any GT teams, nor do they supply any of the HyperCar teams. So really, it's a tire war, more like a Cold War tire war, because there is no actual war going on. There's two tire brands on the track at the same time, but they're not actually competing against one another. This is, in American terms, this is what we call a tech, but this is actually scrutineering when we're talking about a FIA World Endurance Championship event. It's a huge tent. I remember last year, the last couple of times I've come to this event, you can see how high they get the cars up in the air to make sure they are legal. Another thing that's kind of interesting about the FIA World Endurance Championship is this paddock is really totally mobile. These are all offices for teams. These are the Ferrari offices right here. These all come in on big, gigantic crates, just like the cars. They ship all of this stuff all over the world. That's how they do a world championship. And like I was mentioning, here we are. Kind of appropriate. This is a team that's going to steal a lot of headlines, and a team that a lot of people are very excited about. The Ferrari 499P for Ferrari AF Corsa. Beautiful car. You can see this one's up on the jacks right now. Team members looking over it. There are two cars here. One of these crashed during the prologue, but they've clearly gotten it back together. Beautiful machine here. As far as I know, it's actually a Dallara chassis. I saw John Daggies was one of the first people to publicly confirm that, though. I'll just say I'd had my suspicions that it's a similar tub to the LMDH car. But V6 engine here, hybrid, and all the factory hypercars are hybrids. So a lot of hype for this one. It's been fast in practice, and we'll see. Antonio Giovinazzi, part of Formula One for a time, on the driving duties here. We'll move to the first GT car, and of course, it's AF Corsa. What's cool too is that for each hypercar, the FIA has done a big banner, so that's the first time and only time I'll point that out. There is no GT Pro anymore. AF Corsa was such a big part of the GT Pro division, but obviously we don't have that anymore. In fact, this is not only the last year for these beautiful and venerable GTE cars, but in fact, this is the last time that these cars will race in the United States. It's amazing to think about that. This class really became so popular because of the commitment that the American Le Mans Series under Don Panos had to GT2 and all the manufacturer support here. So it's kind of fitting that their time ends here at Sebring. Another AF Corsa car, so clearly Ferrari has a big presence here, and naturally it's another red Ferrari. Beautiful car. Another hypercar, and this one I'm really happy to see that it's here. There was so much speculation, so many people talking about this particular effort, the Floyd Vanwall racing team. This is what we used to call a bicollis. It's not a bicollis anymore. First time that they've come to Sebring, and I almost said it was the first time that they've raced in the U.S., but then I forgot that Circuit of the Americas is indeed actually in the U.S. This car is unique as one of two hypercars that is not a hybrid. And this car is actually one of the noisiest cars on the grid, which is great from a fan perspective. Beautiful machine. Again, this is their first effort they've actually gotten here. Jacques Villeneuve 97 F1 champion, 95 IndyCar champion, 95 Indy 500 champion on the driving duties for this. And just for posterity's sake, and because of the fact that I can say this, because this car will race at the 24 Hours of Le Mans and Jacques Villeneuve will be doing driving duties, you know, on the off chance that the Bicalis team does win, Jacques Villeneuve would achieve the Triple Crown before Juan Pablo Montoya or Fernando Alonso. So an interesting thought process there. United Autosports, LMP2. Like I mentioned, LMP2, totally spec. You've got Oricas, you've got Gibsons, you've got Goodyears. Every single car like this. Of course, this team owned by Zach Brown. And they've really been a stalwart in this particular form of competition. 22, 23. A pretty strong driver lineup here, as you can see. Josh Pearson, you'll remember from Indy Lights. He's got a part-time schedule in that series this year. Youngest driver ever to run at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Tom Bloomquist and Olivier Jarvis, or Oliver Jarvis. Do I need to talk about their credentials? We've seen them so much in the IMSA series. Oh, hey, it's Penske. So the Penske Porsches are here. Now these are two different cars than the ones that are racing in IMSA. These are the WEC cars. There will be a third one at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. This car is interesting because the last time Penske raced a Porsche at Sebring, they won. And they used a very, very similar engine. This particular car utilizes essentially the same engine layout as the Porsche RS Spyder, which is really neat. There are two cars here, 5 and 6. And eventually, there will be more Porsches because they're our customer. This is one of the few HyperCar competitors, though of course this is an LMDH car, that is selling to customer teams. And we'll describe a few that will be Porsche customers as soon as the next round at Spa for the World Endurance Championship. Yes, it's that Dempsey. Dempsey Proton Racing, stalwarts in this series. I mean, it seems like I can't even remember a time where this car wasn't racing in some form. The 77 for Dempsey Proton. Proton is another car or another team that will eventually be getting a Porsche. There's some question of whether or not they'll get it in time for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. They have an entry which may or may not end up being a Porsche, depending on whenever Amazon delivers their Porsche. I joke. Another team that's going to eventually be heading to HyperCar competition is Iron Lynx. Now they're in a bit of a transitional period because when the GTE cars go away in the next couple of years, or at the end of this year, they will be transitioning to Lamborghini for their GT programs, as well as Lamborghini in the prototypes. So this is another team that's expanding. You'll notice that will be a common theme. Teams thinking about and then moving to the HyperCar division. Prema Racing, LMP2 car here as well. A couple teams. What's interesting about LMP2, I guess, it's kind of like Formula One, where pretty much each team that's represented enters two cars. So Prema Racing very much like that. Daniel Kvyat on the driving lineup for this one, as well as Mirko Bortolotti, who you've seen on this channel before. Wouldn't be surprised to see them go to a higher prototype division one of these days. Toyota Gazoo Racing. These cars are a very interesting case study here because they have been revised this season, and that is that there was a time where the HyperCar division was supposed to be a lot different than it actually turned out to be. It was supposed to be more GT-based cars. And of course, Toyota, being one of the early adopters of this program, had to build a whole bunch of weight into their car. Well now, seeing as HyperCar essentially is, let's be honest, it's LMP1 light, they have revised this car heavily to try to be able to compete with the purpose-built prototypes that are coming in late from manufacturers like Ferrari, Porsche, Peugeot, for example. What's another interesting point, while Toyota has won this race before, a purpose-built HyperCar has not won at Sebring yet. This car, of course, flipped over last year with Jose Maria Lopez And actually the Alpine went on to win, which of course was an LMP1 based car. Actually once we called that a Rebellion, but we don't call it that anymore. WRT, here's another team that I could very easily see becoming a hypercar team of some sort. A lot of history here. A lot of people who are familiar with the GT division, GT3 racing in particular, will remember this team as kind of the Audi factory team. Of course, Audi's kind of stepped back from everything but Formula One. And speaking of Formula One, Robert Kubica is on the driving lineup for this, as well as Louis Dallatraz. So some strong drivers here for WRT, and again, it would tend to suggest that they're headed for bigger and better things. Peugeot. Now here's another interesting team, because the last time they ran Sebring, they won. Though it wasn't the factory effort, it was actually the Oreca back in 2011, which ironically was also a WEC race, or WEC, but it was a combined event with the American Le Mans Series, which is very interesting. Now the factory Peugeots were there, but they did not win. Of course, you'll know about this car is that everybody talks about it because it does not have a rear wing. A very unique prototype, very unique, especially in these days. Now they've added some, we'll say a bit of a crass thing to say, they've added some junk to the trunk of the rear of this thing. They've added some extra aerodynamics. They're not quite calling it a wing yet, but it does appear wing-like. But at least at this point, this is a very low drag, very reliant on the Venturi tunnels underneath it. Not exactly the type of car that's going to go well at Sebring, but you imagine that the French are mainly focused on the 24 hours of Le Mans. Aston Martin. TF Sport, we know them. I guess we're calling this ORT by TF. Thankfully they didn't put a W in front of the name. We got two Astons here. We got the 777 in a classic British racing green. You love to see it. The Vanwall is also in British racing green. And then the 25 car. Not a lot of variety anymore in GTE. Mainly just Porsche, Ferrari, and Aston Martin. And then of course we've got the one lone Corvette. Inter-Europol competition, they've been a long time stalwart in LMP2. Unfortunately, they don't run a Ligier anymore, but they did used to. So you've seen enough Orecas, I think, at this point. Two-driver lineup here for Northwest AMR. Paul Dallalana, I'll say it right, and Nikki Team, who you may know from Streaming Wars over on Twitch. Good-looking car, and they have been long time supporters of Aston Martin. Here is a car that is going to be a hypercar pretty soon. The Hertz Team Jota. Hypercar is not ready yet, at least the Porsche hypercar, but this is what this car will eventually be. And in fact, they've even talked about going to two cars. So when we look at the 28 Jota Sport Oreca, that may also eventually become a Porsche. That's pretty cool. Definitely will be a Porsche for the 24 hours of Le Mans. Speaking of Porsche, Project One. I believe these guys ran the Rolex 24, at least a car in a very similar livery did. Looks a lot like the Hens T-Bird swap shop car. Love to see it. More hypercars. Glickenhaus Racing. We spoke to Jim last year on the channel. We know how he feels. Always a strong opinion. Beautiful car. Again, one of the non-hybrid hypercars. Only two of those in the field. There will be a third non-hybrid car at Le Mans when Glickenhaus enters two. But this is a totally passion project from Jim Glickenhaus. Unique engine to this one. I think it's called a Pipo. It's a V8. Makes some noise. We like it. Romain Dumas, Ryan Briscoe, Olivier Poix on the driving lineup for this one. They were pretty quick last year. They have not found the pace this year, that's for sure. Vector Sport, another Oreca, car number 10. Don't know how I feel about the dark red with the blue. That just from a livery standpoint. Kessel Racing, they're clearly trying to catch a lawsuit from the mouse with that one, but they've had that car guy font for a while, so I guess they're getting rid of it, or getting away with it anyway. This is interesting. So Don Rohr, if you listen to the podcast, mentioned this. This is the Michelin tent. I showed you the Goodyear tent earlier. Look how big this is here. I mean, this is just spectacular. Lots and lots of tires. Virtually the entire field here at Sebring, outside of LMP2 and LMP in WEC, supplied by Michelin. Here's another team that's going to go to the HyperCars next year, Alpine Elf Team, which is interesting because they are not actually building a hypercar. They're building an LMDH, which will compete in the hypercar category. These are the defending winners overall last year at Sebring for the 1,000 miles. They had to go down to LMP2 because their LMP1 was no longer hypercar eligible. But that, again, changes next year. So here's a pop quiz. What does GR stand for? I'll give you 5 seconds. The GR stands for Gulf Racing. So it's Gulf Racing, but you'll notice that Gulf has not sponsored the team in about 2 or 3 years. So very interesting. It's kind of like HMV back in the IndyCar days, where it was Herdez Viva Mexico, well after the point where it was actually sponsored by Herdez. Here's the safety car. Why they gave this a garage, I don't know. But there you go for all you Porsche files out there. And we're going to end up with some big heavy Chevys here. Cadillac Racing, which has been extremely fast. Surprisingly fast, I would say, because I don't think a lot of people expected that cars based on GTP or LMDH or whatever you want to call this formula would be competitive, and yet Cadillac has certainly been that in both the prologue as well as FP1 here at Sebring. This could be the team that really surprises the Toyotas, both here and at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Of course, this is run by Chip Ganassi Racing, Dallara chassis, Cadillac V8 in the back. It's a hybrid. It, of course, is competing in IMSA. In fact, this is the only car, this particular chassis, the number 2, is the only car right now that has really converged. A car that crossed over from IMSA, or crossed over from the World Endurance Championship into IMSA. But of course, they'll be competing at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, one of 3 Cadillac entries in that race. Again, Chip Ganassi Racing, they know how to win here. They won in the 12-hour last year. So here we come to the final car. Number 33, Corvette Racing. GTE AM for a factory Corvette. That's quite interesting. And it's also interesting that they went out and got one of the fastest AM drivers out there, Ben Keating, and experienced. But here you go. It's kind of fitting. This is the last time this GTE Corvette will race in the GTE category in the States. They're doing it here at the 12 Hours of Sebring. This car, of course, will be retired both here and in IMSA, where it's been kind of modified to fit the GT3 regs for a brand new, totally bespoke GT3 car going forward. But it's amazing. It feels just like yesterday that this car was new, and now it's going out the door. But such is the way in racing. And so that's the Paddock Tour. We go down there, and that's IMSA. But you can turn around again and look at the World Endurance Championship paddock. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it was informative. I wouldn't profess to be an expert in the World Endurance Championship, but it certainly is fun to do things like this and share my passion with you guys. So more coverage throughout the weekend. We'll see you then.